So, I met this guy a long, long, long time ago, even though it was just, figuratively, just by email and reading some of his papers. The first time was when I was desperately looking for something in tech that I did not quite know what was. And when I opened up a paper from him that described how he made Warm Reader, I said, this is it. This is it. I need something to annotate my own graphics, and I don't have that. And I had fought for many years, doing all sorts of tricks that we all had done by importing tech fonts inside Illustrator and all that kind of stuff. And then I said, Warm Reader is what I need, and I use it for a certain number of years before I had to make other choices of operating system, before Illustrator gave up on almost everything I used, and was very sad to lose that. And I find it very funny that we meet back again, and with you working on Tech PDF to provide accessibility to people. So here's Ross Moore, one more talk on accessibility.
Okay. Okay, so you seeing my presentation?
Yes.
Okay, okay, good. I'm going to have to change the sharing later because we won't be just using one program. But anyway, so we'll start off with a presentation in PDF in Acrobat. But as we go into examples, we'll move into other things. So, okay, so it's about accessible tables. So the first question one has to answer is, what is it that makes a table accessible? And so what does it mean for a table to be accessible? What are the kinds of things that you've got to put into a table that LaTeX doesn't normally do? Okay. So there's, all right, W3 have got a good page which says a few things. So here's just a bit of a summary. The basic idea is that header and data cells have to be marked as headers, and the difference between something being data and something saying what the data is about. So the headers say what the data is about, the data delivers the data. Okay. So each data cell needs to be associated with the relevant header cells that tell what the data means. Okay. And if you have a header cell, you have to say, well, which cells does it apply to? So what is the scope of the header cell? Does it apply to rows? Does it apply to columns or groups of rows, and so stuff like that? It all seems pretty clear, pretty reasonable. And there should normally be a caption or a summary that gives a brief overview of what the data is all about within the table. That all seems pretty fine too. But here's well, okay, on that page, this is one of the comments that's made. You can't just rely on visual cues alone to create an accessible table, because what if the person reading it cannot see or cannot receive those visual cues because of some physical disability that they have? Okay, so the idea is you need to do more than that. You need to do the kinds of things in these bullet points. Okay, so here's a kind of example that's used. It's actually was used in preparing a real-world document. It's a schedule for events and talks at a conference, similar to this one, similar kind of size. And you can see the structure in the table here, right? So this view is, in fact, in Acrobat Pro's table editor view. It's not what you would normally see on the PDF page. And all of the blue lines and purple lines and things I've added in on top of that to give you an idea of where the headers are. So if we sort of come over here to, say, here Charles Peretti, it's actually his second mention. for those of us who are fully sighted, it's easy to tell what this is all about. You just glance across the line and you see, okay, he's talking at 12:30, and that's 12:30 on Monday, September 13. Okay, and he's the lead in some activity, and you can even go to the next cell and see what that activity is. We can all do that very easily when we're fully sighted, but what if you're not fully sighted? And so you need to know that, so if a non-fully sighted person, you want their software to be able to tell them that it's in a row with the header of the 12:30 p.m. there, but that header has another header which is telling you the day. So you've got the time, you've got the day, and the header cell above it, so the column header cell up here, is saying that Charles Peretti is the lead in a particular activity. If you've looked in the rest of the table, then you know that the kinds of things that are in here. Okay, so the thing is, the kind of software that blind people use is going to be such that you don't see anything like the whole full picture that a normal sighted person sees, but will only have access to a limited amount of information. But part of that information needs to be pointers to where these header cells are and what's in them. Okay, so that's the kind of problem that we're trying to solve. Okay, so that's one example, and you can see. Okay, so in doing this work, I've invented a little bit of terminology. We've got header cells which can either apply to columns, so these ones at the top apply to the columns beneath them, and the ones on the left-hand side apply to what's left in the row. But a header cell can have a header of its own. Okay, so these dates here, I call these super headers, and in this case it's a super, because it's a header for other row headers, I call it a super row header. Okay, and then down here, when we get to another block, then we have a new super row header for a smaller block of rows, and then another one for a couple more rows down near the bottom. Okay, on the left you can see that this has been taken out of Acrobat Pro, and it's a fully tagged document. You can see the structures. There's table rows, and in a table row you've got a TD is table data, TH is table head, and so on. So you can see that this is indeed a fully tagged PDF document. And then this extra little window over here is saying, it's giving an indication of how we encode the headers. Okay, so the headers is an array of names of other cells, or identifiers for other cells, and those cells there, you can work out the naming scheme. 02, 01, it's okay, sorry about that. It's row 2, column 1, so that header cell is this super row header, as I was calling it, and the second one is row 1, column 2, so that's this cell up here saying that we're looking at a time value. Okay, so it's creating documents that have this kind of information in them. That's the important thing. Okay, or being able to do it is the important thing. Okay, so here's a couple more examples, and the examples are showing different kinds of header cells, and in particular this one down here, there's quite complicated headers. Okay, so there's a lot of column headers, and then there's a couple of super column headers. So this one saying m equals 0.2 is a super column header for the 3 columns immediately. Well, okay, this was delivered with a multi-column 3 cell, so it's centered in under the 3, well, in the middle of those 3 columns, and then the one that says mramp is centered under those 3 columns. Okay, and then there's one block up here, and then there's a second block, and the same kind of stuff occurs down there. Okay, so you can see they can get complicated, and they can get even more complicated. Okay, and this one is one I found on Stack Exchange, and I thought that was interesting. And there's a whole hierarchy of column headers, super column header cells here. Okay, that's a column header, Plasticinian. Wortel is a column header for the second column. Vorgutluden is a column header for the third column and so on, but each of these column headers is grouped with other things, and so they're super headers and a big super header at the top. Okay, so that's the I hope everyone's got the idea of what we're trying to do here. We're trying to make sure that we can put the information in that enables, well, that's going to enable any given a piece of data. What is that data all about? How do I find the descriptions? How do I find the right cells in the table in order to be able to understand what that data is all about? Okay, so I'm going to have a look at a couple of examples that I've prepared. One of them is real world stuff, and another one is basically going through the LaTeX Companion and looking at the different examples of tables in there and trying to make sure that we can tag all those tables properly for tag PDF. Okay, let's look at that second one first. And okay, so we've got tag tabulars from LaTeX Companion 2, and so some of these will be familiar to some of the people in the audience. And you can see there's all kinds of things that LaTeX can do with tables, and there's different colors, background colors, okay, foreground colors in a row, or a background of a row that's overwriting the background colors in a column, and reasonably complicated stuff that can be done. And then some more formal looking tables and various things. Okay, multi-rows, cells for multi-rows, and different alignments, doing things in different ways, and even some other stuff here, aligning columns on special things. Okay, so that's the kind of thing that we want to look at. But also in my abstract I said that we need to be able to do this in HTML, not just in PDF. Okay, and the reason for that is that, well, in the visually disabled community, PDFs don't have a good reputation. They have a pretty bad reputation for accessibility because they haven't been done in the way that I'm doing them here. Okay, well, partly because they haven't been done, and that's what we're trying to address. But on the other hand, what you want to be able to do is to take one of these tag PDFs with that information about how the headers are all related to each other in the table and export it into HTML. And so that's exactly what we're going to do. I want to go back to... Okay, so having seen what that table is about, I want to go back to the slide presentation. Yep, there we go. And by the way, if you want to have a look at these documents and download them either as PDF or as the web pages that result from them, then this link is what's going to take you there. So if we go there, now you've lost that. This is where I'm going to have to change the sharing. So I'm going to switch the sharing to be my whole desktop. Okay, so if someone can verify that you're now seeing my whole desktop and we're now seeing a web page. Can somebody please confirm? Paolo?
Yeah,
someone in the chat.
looks fine. Yeah.
Looks good. Okay, great. Thanks. Fine. Okay, so here is a web page which has actually been created from a PDF document. Okay, and here are the links to those examples as HTML and as PDF. And so the second one, LaTeX Companion, and the original PDF. Okay, but rather than click on that and show you what they look like, I want to show you how we got from the PDF to the web page. So I'm actually going to go to a site which is not my own. It's called well, ngPDF. The NG stands for next generation. Okay, and this is what you do. So I'm going to get rid of the old one, click on this and go to, okay, so the TLC2 tables.pdf. I'm going to choose that, and it's going to upload it, view HTML, and there it is. View the HTML that's resulted from the PDF document that we were looking at earlier. Okay, the cover page has been reduced down to a relatively small piece because you don't need big cover pages in HTML. Okay, but these are the tables, and they're all nicely sized, and different effects are there: writing, center tagging, centering, ragged right, ragged left, so right aligned, left aligned, etc. And pulling through the different colors and the background colors, right? And it is all pretty faithful, at least visually, to what was in the PDF. A couple of them don't really work properly yet. Some of the techniques, like there was colored, special formatting in the row and column lines and so on, and different colored. I think this one was meant to have very wide bands in between some of the rows and columns. Okay, I haven't been able to do that kind of thing yet, but maybe we'll get there sometime. And okay, so the layout of these tables looks all very neat. And then these ones with the multi-rows, okay, I can discuss them in a bit more detail if someone wants to ask questions about them. But basically, we've converted these directly from the PDF into HTML, okay? And that hasn't used the standard methods of producing HTML directly from text source or LaTeX source, but it's used the converter that's back at this site, and it really only works with tag PDF, because tag PDF has the information that you need to get the HTML out of it. Other converters have to use all kinds of heuristics and things. This one doesn't, because the information has been told to it, what kind of information it is within the tag PDF. Okay, so let's see, where did that happen? Let's view that again. Okay, just to convince you that what the information looks like, the extra tagging of the headers, we'll go to our little web inspector here and actually have a look at the underlying HTML that's been produced. Okay, so if we go down, let's find our way through to some tables. Let's bring that up a bit, and let's find the right place. Where is it? Okay, it's probably further down. Yeah, it's further down. Here it is. Okay, first section, table. Okay, so the very first table there. Okay, so that's got a table head. Okay, you can see where the table head is, and it's come from a data type called thead, and it's been given an identifier thead.01. Okay, we can open that up into the table rows and the table headers themselves. Okay, there's a class there for centering, so tab center means that's what provides the centering on that one. Okay, the second one is left aligned, and the third one is right aligned, or centered again. Okay, and you see it has an identifier which says it's a table head. It's part of tabular.01, so that's identifying the whole table itself, and it's telling you which cell it is, so first row and first column. Okay, and first row, second column, first row, third column. Okay, so they're the actual header cells, but what about the data cells? Okay, so if we come and have a look at the data cells, then this first one, okay, well, it's actually a header, so let's go to the middle one. It's a data cell. Okay, and it tells you what its headers are. tabular, okay, so second row, first column for the row header, and first row, second column for the column header. Okay, and it has an ID of its own using the same naming structure. Okay, so these things definitely do have that information in as the value of the headers attribute for the TH class, well, the TH type, the data type, and then extra stuff to do with presentation is in these is given by these classes. Okay, let's try that with a different one, say a colored table. So let's see if we can find that colored table. Get down there. Okay, yeah, so we're going to be in here. Oh, okay, so this one. Okay, so the table has a class called Inline Table Centered Cells. Okay, it has an ID, it's got some heads and its bodies, and say one of those cells as a class. Okay, so now there's several classes involved here. One of them is saying RGB, so that's blue, so it's the background, so it's a background in blue and foreground in 255, 255, 255, so that's white, so it's in white, and it's left aligned, and its headers. Okay, it's got a header which will be the cell day up here. Okay, and it's got its own ID and so on. Okay, so it's the values of these attributes is available to reading technology, and whether the reader does anything with it could well be up to choices that the person makes themselves. Do they want access to this information or do they not? But the point is the information is there. Okay, so if there are any questions about those, or will we go back to the presentation and say a little bit about how we actually achieve this? Okay, so I've got to go back to Acrobat and so on. Okay, and there's another. Okay, so one level up from that place, you'll find more TAG PDF examples that I've done. Okay, here's a slide I want to show. Okay, we're producing documents for PDF according to the Universal Accessibility variant of PDF, which is fully tagged PDF. Okay. Now, it's called Universal Accessibility, and you kind of wonder, I mean, why would you call something universal? There's got to be a reason for it. It can't just be because we think this is the biggest and best thing that there ever is, and we want to show everyone off and whatever, and chose the name. No, there's got to be more to it than that, especially for me as a mathematician, and so that's how this slide came about. Okay. In higher algebra, you have this concept of a universal object for, if you've got objects x and y and you've got relations from x into y or some relationship, then the idea of the universal object is that any other relationship you have from x to y factors through this larger thing, this universal thing. It's a universal thing for x and y. And okay, so some of you mathematicians will recognize this, and for those who aren't, then there's a link to Wikipedia. Okay, but the idea is that if you any structure preserving map from x to y can be factored through the universal object. Okay, well, okay, with documents we have structure in our documents starting off from your LaTeX source, and the idea is you're trying to convey the information to a human reader, but we're doing it through a PDF document. And so the idea is that, well, okay, How does this person interact with the document? It could be done in all kinds of ways. So seeing it on screen, having it read out, looking at an HTML document or an XML or a Word document, or using a Braille keyboard, or who knows what other things. And the idea is that this tag PDF that you make should be able to export into all of those formats and any others that one might devise, including the EPUBs that has been mentioned a couple of times already during this thing. So the tag PDF is meant to contain all the information needed for every one of those export formats. Okay, and so that's the idea, and that's where the universality comes about. Okay, so what about specifically for tabular material? Well, all right. When TeX or LaTeX has a table, creates a table, it's basically done, well, this is the way to think about how it's done. You have some kind of a template which describes aspects about how the cells are formed, okay, and there's the different cells are separated by ampersands, and within that template, the place where the user data is meant to come in is indicated by these hash signs, these hash symbols. Okay, and so, okay, in LaTeX you don't do this directly, you do it through, you create the template using the column specifications at the beginning of as the first argument in the, is it the first argument? Well, certainly one of the arguments for the tabular environment, or several different tabular environments. Okay, but then the data is provided separated with the ampersands and double backslashes at the end of the rows. Okay, and however many rows down to the end tabular. Okay, and so that's how and the way we think about it is that the information in each of those cells between the ampersands is merged in at the position, or merged into the template at the position of the hashes. So that's what I'm trying to indicate here. Okay, and that all seems reasonably straightforward, right? It's how we conceptualize it. Okay, you're merging in the data into the template at the right place. Okay, and we think of it this way both as an author, because as the author we're producing the data and we're presenting our data. And if you're reading it, then that you see the structure in the table, and that's kind of the way you can think about it. That's all nice and good. However, it's not the way TeX actually works. It's not the way how TeX processes the data that we put in there. Okay, it is the way that, well, I did work on LaTeX to HTML almost 20 years ago now, well, probably more than 20 years ago now. Okay, and that was the way that you merged user code, or the user's data, into a template constructed from the table specification. And we did do this. We did merge. You basically merged everything in, and then you processed it all and created the HTML after the mergers having happened. But that's actually not the way TeX does it. TeX doesn't do it that way, and I'll show you how TeX does do it. Okay. So TeX doesn't do merging. What it actually does is, well, we'll see why I've said switching up here. Okay. If you've got your template, it starts off processing these tokens. So all the dots could represent tokens, and they can be quite large, and we'll see some examples of that in a little while. Okay, and once it gets to the hash sign, it now says, okay, switch out of the template, come down and have a look at the user data, and start to pull in that user data. And so it does this and does whatever processing that is meant to happen here, including collecting together the words and the numbers or whatever the data is, until it gets to the ampersand symbol in the user's source. Okay, it then swings back up to where that hash sign was, and finishes off the template up until its ampersand. And then you do the same kind of thing again, and so off it goes, and off it goes, and basically you follow the arrows around, processing whatever the macros are that you encounter, and until you've gone through the whole thing. And the result kind of looks like you've merged it, but you haven't really merged it. What you've done is you've processed it in that particular order. And the ampersands and the hashes are switching you backwards and forwards between the template and the user data. Okay, and of course that's not complete. I've missed out some bits. Okay, whenever you get to an ampersand here, what it actually does before, so once we've got past the V1 and we've encountered that, it actually has a look down at the user data to see what's coming next. Right, so this is looking at what's coming immediately after where that ampersand was in the user data. Okay, and has a look to see what's there, but it doesn't process it. Okay, because what it's looking for is some of these. Could there be some of these special commands here? Okay, in LaTeX, well, what it does, it actually expands with the first thing it sees, and into more primitive things. So something like a multi-column in LaTeX will expand and give you a multi-span, or it might give you an omit first, but you can get some of these things. And if you get any of these things, then things change a little bit. The order in which things are done can change. Okay, and so that happens at each of the ampersands, so I've put in those blue ones. Okay, and it also in fact happens at the very beginning too, the beginning of a row. So before it starts to do these template tokens, it checks out what's coming first in the user data in case it's one of these things. And if it is one of those things, well, what happens is, well, so let's take omit. So omit means forget the template part of it for this cell. Okay, so forget all of that. Just process the data, okay, until you get to the ampersand. And then when you go back, don't go back to the hash, go back to the next ampersand. Okay, and also, of course, you might as well check what's coming after that ampersand in case it's another one of these things. But anyway, so you can see that there's different things can happen. Okay, so all of these token streams are basically, they're processed in the order as we've written down here, but you have the option of, I don't know if that's in the way for you, I'm not quite sure what you can see. Yeah, you probably can't see that one. Okay, so you have the ability to omit different portions of the template, and you can include extra non-aligned material. So that's what this one is. The /no-align allows you to include stuff that isn't going to be taken into account in formatting the table, but nevertheless still appears in the appropriate position within the table. Okay, so there's a lot of stuff that actually can be done inside TeX. But you see how the idea here is different to just simply merging. Okay, and it's because of this richness of what you can do that you can get all the kinds of things that happen in those tabulars in the LaTeX Companion. Okay, so let's look at an actual preamble from a real LaTeX preamble in one of those examples. Okay, here's what it looks like, the preamble. It's masses and masses of tokens, different control sequences. This one has color table loaded, so you get these CT setups, CT row color, CT cell color things, CT do color, and all of that. But there's masses and masses, and so you can see why I just, in the previous slides, I was just using the ellipsis dots to represent all of that. Okay, here's your ampersands. The ampersands are occurring. And here's the hashes. Well, they've been replaced by a macro by the name of /@sharp. Okay, and that's a little trick that is used. The reason for doing this is quite a bit of work has to go on in order to turn that simple column specification into all of this. There's masses of expansion goes on, and when that's all being worked out, /@sharp is just a benign control sequence and it doesn't do anything. But once you're actually wanting to use it to process the tables, /@sharp becomes the hash symbol that we saw on in the previous slides. Okay, now the thing about when tagging, so @sharp is where the user data comes in. If you're going to tag data, you need to be able to access something directly before the user data comes in, and also something directly after the user data comes in. Okay, so you might think, well, all right, one way of doing that is, okay, let's pick up ignore spaces and change it to something else, make it do something else first to initiate the tagging, and then similarly at the unskip on the other end. Okay, it's a possible way of doing it, but it's actually not as convenient as you might think. Okay, so here's some notes on that. Right, the tells you what /@sharp's all about. Ignore spaces comes immediately before the data tokens, and unskip immediately after. But the problem is that those tokens often get redefined in other packages anyway, and that's going to make it really awkward to decide to actually turn them into something that you can use for beginning and ending tagging. So I don't actually do it that way. I certainly thought about it and tried it and discovered that it's a bit too problematic. Okay, so instead what we do is that you're going to redefine what tabular does anyway, so that's okay, so you do that. But this, okay, so what I'm going to show you now is what actually happens. Yeah, okay, so here's another, okay, so that previous, on the previous page here, this one is the table, is what the preamble looks like without any adjustments for doing tagging. Right, so you might run, if you run a LaTeX document with the appropriate packages loaded and you use this as your preamble, then this is what you're going to get, totally irrespective of if you add in tagging. If you now add in tagging, then this is the kind of thing that you're going to get. Okay, so the sharps and the ampersands are indicated, okay, quite clearly. Some extra stuff has been put in here. Okay, so these are the, all right, okay, so the col spec here is different to the one on the previous page. Okay, and you can actually see how these correspond. That greater than symbol is that greater than, comes from that greater than symbol there. Okay, and that C here corresponds to the C here. Okay, and similarly all the way through. You can see that the different letters in the preamble, not their arguments. Oh, I'm not sure why there's a slash there. That shouldn't be there. Okay. Okay. So these ones are used to set those properties for the alignment properties in the cell, and there'll be similar ones for color, but in this one there isn't any color being used. Okay, and so you can see it's a real great long mess of stuff. You can put some extra put some tagging information into here. This one is advancing a counter, so that we've got a special counter to be able to help us with things and so on. Okay, and yeah, okay, so this says a bit about what the green boxes are saying. Okay, so that's kind of some feature that we needed to do. But now let's actually go through and see how tagging really works. Okay, we've replaced the hashes with the @sharp and so on. But now at the very beginning, you have to replace tabular with something else, which does a bit more work than what tabular normally does, but then also still does what tabular normally does. Okay. But here's the crux. We turn the ampersand in the data source, in the data stream, into an active character. Okay. And you'll see why as we go through this. Okay. We also need a special macro inserted at the very beginning of the tabular data. So this is going to be read before we get to the tabular data, or we can insert it into that data stream at that point. Okay. And then this is how we're going to work through things. Okay. So we might start off at the beginning of the preamble, get to the sharp. We then come down to the data, so we look at this new macro, and this new macro is going to look ahead for what's coming. Okay, it could be coming at the beginning of the table. You could have a top rule, you might have an H line, you might have multi-columns, you might have multi-rows, all kinds of things which are special cases and not just ordinary data cells or ordinary header cells. Okay, and accordingly, if you encounter one of those, then you're going to have to do something special about it. Okay. So then we start so having done that, then we start to look at the data. We come through the data as before, and then we hit the ampersand. Okay. So start table has started tagging for that first cell. Okay. But now we have to close the tagging in that first cell. Okay. And then move into what's going to happen next for the next cell. Okay, and then for the next cell we need to go through another of these kinds of macros that looks ahead to find out what's coming and then adjust things accordingly. Okay, and then once we've got that, then we can come back to back into the preamble and finish off in the preamble. Okay, well, continue in the preamble. So now this time I've put in, we're going to have to look ahead to see what's coming next, and that's looking ahead at the result of what this cell tagging at start at has done. Okay, and then having checked that out, it then comes back and resumes, assuming it's not one of the special things. Come back and finish off that cell, and then jump back down, switch back down again to the position just after that ampersand and start this tagging for the next cell. Okay. And then once you've got through that cell, so start tagging for that cell. So, okay, so this now means the stuff that cell tagging at start may have put there. Okay, once you've done that, you now go back to you now continue on with the user data and finish off that cell. And then you go to further for more and more cells. Okay, and that's the kind of thing that has to happen. Okay, and that can only be done, well, it's best done. Okay, nothing in tech you can say that's the only way of doing it. Just some ways are going to be better than others. So this is what I've found to be the best way of doing it. Make that the ampersand in the data stream be active, and use it to close off the cell that's already started and prepare for starting the next cell and get its tagging working and so on. So it turns out to be pretty complicated, but it's reliable and it works, and the examples that I've produced show you that it works, and it converts into HTML really, really well if you use the appropriate converter, that ngPDF converter, to get from PDF, tag PDF into HTML. Okay, so that's as much as I wanted to show. I think, have we gone with the timing? Yeah.
Well, the right time.
Just the right time. Okay, good stuff. Normally I don't quite get to show everything I've prepared. This time I think I've gone through it all reasonably well. But there should be time for some questions maybe. Okay.
Any questions?
Yeah. Will we stop the share? Yeah. Okay, stop the share. Okay, Boris.
Uh,
Boris is.
I have a question. I understand how you can tag cells, but you also need to understand which cells are your headers, which column
Yes,
headers, and so on.
that's right.
And you cannot, in general case, get it from the LaTeX code, can you?
Yes and no. Basically, the approach I take is that if it's a data cell, sorry, if it's a header cell, you are doing something in the code to make it look different to what would normally be there as a data cell, as a piece of data. That could be you've applied a text BF to make it boldface. It could be that you put it in a multi-column. It could be you put it in a multi-row. It could be that there's a C line underneath it and another one, so that a couple of cells together are being related by the fact that you've got this line drawn underneath them. And yes, you can see all those things in the LaTeX source. So the point is, I've got a whole lot of programming which is based on examples in which these kinds of things are done. And we said, well, all right, if you're going to do this kind of stuff, then if you're going to use those kinds of macros, then this seems to be the interpretation that one applies. And thereby you can deduce what those, you can deduce those, that's what those cells are all about. Now, it may be that you can't deduce it on a single pass. It may be you have to store some information in what I call a history file, and this gets read back in at the beginning of the next run, and then you can use information from that history file to help you make those decisions about what is a header cell and what's the scope of the header cell, how many columns does it apply to, how many rows does it apply to, and all of this. So if you put all the right kind of information, if you collect and store the right kind of information from one run so that it can be reused on the next run, then yes, you can do that. You can do a lot of that. I'm not saying you can do it 100% reliably in every case, but you can most certainly do a lot of that. And my examples show that. If you want to look at some more of those examples, I'm happy to do that and have a look at the kind of logic involved. Then sure, we can certainly do that.
Thank you. It's very complicated logic, but it could be done. Thank you very much.
Yes. Okay.
We have one question very quick from Dennis Claudio. How widespread is TUG PDF in the world and how mature?
Okay, that's a good question. It's only catching on. It's at the stage where it's starting to catch on. It's important that it catches on because it's basically enshrined in US government law. Section 508 of the American Disabilities Act says that says that if you're going to have a PDF as your, well, if any government agency wants to use a PDF as a document to be made available to the public, then, well, it's actually worded as saying it has to be able to be translated into an accessible format. But that basically means that, well, for us that generate lots and lots of PDFs, that basically means that we have to generate TAG PDFs. Otherwise, somebody else is going to be taking them and converting them into a different format, and perhaps using not very good software, and we will lose control over the fidelity of the documents that we produce. So for us, we need TAG PDF if we're wanting LaTeX to be used within government institutions and offices, and that includes the scientific offices. So there's masses of them, and that's what we're working for, to try and make it more popular, to get it more widespread. We have to be able to handle scientific data into TAG PDF in a reliable way, in order for LaTeX to be able to spread. Otherwise, it'll have to die out in some places where it's typically used at the moment and has been in the past. That's the way I look at it.
You have a couple of questions. You want to answer them offline? Do you want to?
Yeah. So we've got one there from Mac. Well, from Dayan first, right? Yeah. So Dayan's one. Yeah, definitely. Are there aligned constructs accessible? Absolutely. Of course you can. And XY-pick diagrams, he mentions that because that's part of my work. But those diagrams that I was showing you of how the TEC processes the tables, they were done in XY-pick, right? All those arrow diagrams doing up. So, yeah, although I must say I haven't adapted tagging of Beamer documents yet. So. That wasn't an example of an accessibly tagged XY-pick diagram. But yeah, certainly we can work on that. And then Max Chernoff's the advantage of using the PDF attachments feature to include an HTML file. That's what the point of my of the analogy for what does universal mean is it really addresses this question. If you've put all of that information into the PDF document in the right way so that it can then be found by any processor, written especially for it, of course, for tag PDF, of course, then you don't have to have a HTML attachment in a PDF document. You can get it directly from the tag PDF document, as I showed. Okay. It's really easy for a screen reader to interpret raw HTML. Well, some screen readers. There are screen readers and there are screen readers, and there are other kinds of screen readers. It may be that a particular person has said, hey, look, this one works well because it suits me and the kind of disability that I have, but then go to the next person and they may say something different. That they don't like what comes out of it, or they don't find it as easy, or they find something else better. So the point is you want to put everything into the tag PDF document that's going to allow every other kind of assistive technology to be able to get what it wants, to be able to convey the information to the person using it. Right? The one PDF document should be able to have everything which suits everybody, but of course they then have to have appropriate software to do it, right? So yeah, I mean, existing software that doesn't yet properly support PDF is going to die. It's going to go out. It'll be, it will. What's the word? Well, I won't say mutate or, evolve into something else once there's sufficiently many tag PDF documents out there to force the evolution along. Either that or tag PDF will die, which would be a pity because it's quite clearly it's well thought out. It's a lot of work has gone into it, and it would be a real pity that if it didn't catch on, because it's capable of solving these problems. Or it's capable of being the format to help solve these problems.
Thanks very much, Ross. And one more step towards accessibility.
Yeah.